So here we are at the Christian Resources Exhibition, and I suppose you could say that a good resource for Christians in the arts is the Arts Centre Group, which is celebrating its 50th birthday this year. A co-founder member is joining us now, Sir Cliff Richard. Welcome to the exhibition.
Thank you, Cindy, very much. It's very nice to be part of it.
It's great. I was going to ask you to sing Happy Birthday, but that would probably result in a massive performance fee for us, and I don't think we could cope with that. But, so how did you feel? Let's go back to 1971 when you and I and Nigel Goodwin, an actor who was a Christian, came up with this idea. Nigel's Pad, I think, was what we were going to call it originally. But what did you feel about those original thoughts of Nigel's?
Well, I mean, it was the beginning, as you say, and therefore all the thoughts of it were, I think, very good. I liked the idea that we as Christians could share it with other people within the arts. You know, the arts are full of very sensitive people. I remember saying to somebody that I wish I had thick skin because sometimes the press can be so painful and hurtful. And this actor said to me, no, you never want a thick skin because we have thin skins, and that's why we are so emotional and we can show it and feel things. So I stopped feeling like that. And then I thought, well, how wonderful if one could present one's own faith without banging people over the head and just let them have that wonderful choice of believing or not believing.
Because weren't the press trying to sort of say to you, you can't be a Christian and be in show business? Didn't they say that to you?
Well, in those early days, I guess, you know, music was just either carols or hymns in the church. I think it was difficult and there was a problem. I mean, obviously the church has always had to change, and fortunately it has managed to change quite well. It still gets stuck sometimes, I believe, but most of the times now, for instance, once you and I and the band and all started doing gospel concerts, we were showing that we were believers and that with our music, we were able to touch so many people. And so slowly, that kind of barrier was moved away. I don't remember how or when. It wasn't overnight, but suddenly I was being invited not only to do gospel concerts, but to go to churches, to go to colleges and schools and talk about and take a guitar and sing a couple of gospel songs.
But going back to those very early days of your Christian walk, you obviously felt there was a need for something like the Arts Centre Group. Why did you think that?
Well, I mean, the Arts Centre Group, I mean, the thing about it is that the arts have always been, it's always been a sensitive area. When you see the greatest of the actors and actresses, you know that these people understand how somebody else might have felt, and through their own feelings were able to present it. And so therefore it seemed to me that the Arts Centre, like everywhere, it's just another part of the world. If ever the world needed God and Jesus, it's now. If ever the world needed to understand what true love is and understand the phrase, love your enemies. I mean, if you love your enemy, you eradicate him or her within one kiss. It's an amazing way of thinking about it all. And so therefore the Arts Centre, because it was part of my life then and yours, we were part of the arts. Yeah, well, it seemed to be a terrific thing to try to do, just try to get to people. And you remember those lovely evenings we used to have, and we used to get some light food around, a couple of glasses of wine maybe. But it was a time when you were able to talk to other people who were not necessarily believers, but who were interested, curious, and they would come up with some great thoughts too. Of course they did. So it was, for me, it was just a way of making use of a life that God gave me that I could never have believed would last this long anyway. But at least those days, I was like, you know, in the charts all the time and stuff like that. So it was an obvious thing, I think, for me to be involved in, because once I started my spiritual travels, it was a need for me to be useful in some way.
And you were a great role model for people to look up to, in that sense that you were a Christian and you were prepared to talk about your faith. My abiding memory of those early days at Hornton Place, the original place of the Arts Centre Group, was bean bags. We had loads of bean bags all over the floor, as I seem to recall.
Remember, that's right. The only thing about it was you stretched out and they were very comfortable, but very difficult to get up. It's ridiculous.
So looking back to those early days of your Christian walk, what do you think helped you the most to kind of stay on track? Because, you know, you were saying you were on tour a lot, you were away from your family, you were away from friends, you couldn't get to church, it wasn't that easy. So, you know, what kept you going?
I think the fact that, you know, when I first became a Christian, it was in my bed in a house of a friend, actually. I had a room at the front of the house, and I had been reading my Bible. I'd been meeting Christians and asking questions. And I remember lying in that bed saying, okay, you know, that Jesus said, behold, I stand at the door and I knock, and whoever opens the door, I will enter and sup with him. I'm thinking, okay. So I just said, Jesus, listen, if opening the door is saying I would like to be in this new life, then I'm opening the door. I slept really well that night, but I didn't hear any thunder or lightning saying, welcome home. None of that. But about 3 or 4 months later, I was in Paris doing a concert there. And where the hotel I stayed in had an open area on the pavement that served coffee and stuff. And I was there having coffee. And somebody came that I knew. And he said, Cliff, my friend, I can't remember who it was, but they came over and sat and we had coffee together. And after about half an hour, he said, I'm going to go, I'm leaving now. But he said, you've changed. And I said, what do you mean? He said, you haven't sworn or anything like that. Apparently I swore a lot when I pre my faith. And he said, there's something, and that's very different for you. It was after he'd gone, I thought, oh, now wait a minute though. I thought nothing had happened, but something had happened. And it's usually someone else that notices that something's happened. So I took that as a sign that I was on the right track, and just let it follow. And I've grown in. You need to grow in your faith, which means you need to continue to keep the Bible available to yourself, for yourself. And also being able to talk about it, Cindy, was part of my growth, was because of who I am, and because therefore people were interested in hearing not just me, but anybody that has, I hate the word celebrity, but you know what I mean. They being able to talk about it over and over again, it may not have done them any good. It did me wonders. Absolute wonders, because the more you can speak about what you believe, the deeper it becomes, because you think, of course, that's why I believe it. And so, yes, of course, we long to have people, you know, join the fold, but that's up to them. And some people have said, "Oh, you were instrumental in creating someone else's Christian life." I say, "Okay, instrumental is good, because in the end, none of us can convert anybody. Conversion can only happen between that person and God."
And in terms of the Art Centre group, adding our numbers, and we were thrilled, weren't we, when people sort of came and joined us in those early days, because we didn't think there were that many of us, actually. Christians in showbiz is a very select little group, but it was great when it started to grow. Where do you see the Art Centre group going now? I mean, it's obviously a very different animal to what it was when we started it. It doesn't have a headquarters in the same way, and it doesn't do the sort of things. But how do you see it working now, and perhaps in the future? Here we are at 50. Where next?
I know. Well, I don't really know. It's impossible to know what. We can only travel the road that we've been given. And so we did that when we started. I know for a fact that the Art Centre is still welcomed into theaters and places like that. And people do go and discuss with them. Christians do go in. The Art Centre is still functioning, in other words. I always feel it's like when I first started singing, remember we did all those concerts, it seemed like we were the only art people that were Christians. I mean, I'm sure that wasn't necessarily true, but it felt like that. And so therefore today, I was always hoping, for instance, that there'd be another singer come along and do it. It's because I'm 80 now, and I'm not sure how long I can keep going. But talking about it like this is easy for me. I like to be able to present what I feel and think, and all of us do. And I guess it's part of our. We're all arrogant, I suppose, in some way. And I try not to think that people need what I say. I need to say it. What they do with it, they can dump it if they want to.
Absolutely.
But the Art Centre still has a role. The Art Centre still has a role because there are lots of artists. And when you think of what's happened in the pandemic, I bet you it's made a lot of people think about themselves. How do they deal with this? And maybe, where does God fit into this? And sometimes that's the first question you need to ask. And hopefully you meet up with people who have an answer. not the answer necessarily, but an answer that makes you go further. And I would have thought that Chris and friends will be doing that regularly, but giving people a chance to ask questions and then digest the answers.
Yeah, and of course the Arts Centre Group gave birth, as it were, to various organisations like Christians in Entertainment. You've got Chris Kidney, I know you're a patron of that, and Chris is going backstage a lot still, and as you say, being able to go into the theatres is great, and meeting people at a point of need, which, you know, is wonderful. I wish that had been around when I first started. It would have been great. I guess you do too. But what can the local church do you think, to encourage anybody in their congregation who has a talent, whether it's acting, singing, mime, dancing, whatever it is? What would you think local churches could do to encourage people more?
I guess they just have to be open more. And a church that perhaps has somebody that they think has a talent for either playing an instrument or writing, composing, for instance, that sort of thing. I think the church at the moment does try to encourage. Certainly in some of the churches I went to in America, they're very open, and, you know, they have wonderful music. I've been to churches where the band and the singer, you know, one just would expect them to be in the charts next week. They're really good. And but our world of entertainment is stacked with people. And all I know is that the more I see these Britain's Got Talent type shows, you suddenly realize how much talent there is. But unless the X factor is there, they're not going to make it particularly in a big way. But nevertheless, I think the church can and should entertain entertainers. They should actually say, look, we're right behind you, go for it. And I'm sure they do now, Cindy. I know, because they're so aware of show business. And when you think about, certainly in America, sometimes I think it goes a little over the top in America, where it's almost a show. You know, the production of a church meeting is almost a show. But there again, you know, it's a choice. If you don't like that kind of approach to Christian things, you don't have to go to that church. But the thing is, there are various churches. You know, we have the Catholic Church, we have the Protestant Church, and there's all sorts of beliefs and thoughts. And in the end, we choose. But basically, I think we'd all agree on this. They are all aiming at the same thing. We're all going to get something wrong, and God is going to slap a few wrists, including mine, I think. But it's the fact that we are all aiming at the same thing. And therefore, I've become so much less judgmental about things. Even if I'm sure if I met somebody who's from some other faith completely, you would recognize that they believed in a greater being. And as soon as someone believes in that greater being, and as we know, there is only one, then the chances are that they are spiritually already accepted by that greater being. So I've sort of widened my thoughts a great deal. But as I say, in America, the churches welcome and absolutely embrace singers, players, and I've been and seen some of them. I don't know whether, again, you know, you can have a fantastic belief, have a fantastic voice, play great guitar, but never have a desire to be a full-blown entertainer. And some of the places I see, it's been like that. Their whole being is to express in music the faith, and you could see the audiences, they react to that. They cheer, they stomp, they praise Jesus, and it's good. So I think the church is in a good place at the moment. You know, you just have to, as I say, nobody's perfect. And sometimes you know, churches can follow a pattern that maybe you don't agree with, but you know that there's still that street to Jesus is what they are trying to follow.
Yeah. So finally, if somebody comes up to you today backstage, you know, you're about to go on and do your thing, and somebody comes up and says, "You can't be a Christian and be in show business," what do you say to them?
Well, I'd like to think that you and I have proved that it's not true. It's true. You can be anywhere and be a Christian. When you think about when Jesus met tax collectors, you know, who were fiddling the tax, I assume sometimes, and yet he didn't think they were not for. It's not their business that was wrong. They were wrong. So anybody, You can be in show business and love Jesus, as we've proved. We too have done it many times in front of the public. And it's been for me an honor to be able to say to somebody, yeah, I believe in Jesus. And and I'm in show business. And you can, any business you're in, as long as you're based with honesty and the desire to spread love, I don't see how anybody can reject us.
I'm sure that's true. So here's to the next 50 years of the Arts Centre Group. You and I won't be part of it, but here's to the next 50 years. Cliff, thanks so much for joining us. Hope the tour goes really well.
Thank you, Cindy. I look forward to seeing you on it because, funnily enough, it's very difficult. This tour is really difficult. We're in a bubble. I'm in a bubble. My band are in a bubble. We can't have people backstage. So I mean, it's terrible. If I want to see my family, they have to come to the hotel and get laterally flowed. It's ridiculous, but it's still we're enjoying the rehearsals. So thanks for your good wishes, and fingers crossed that it goes well.
I look forward to seeing you at the Albert Hall next month.
All
I think it is. Oh yes, it is next month. I think that'd be great. It'll be good.